Today's video is on some, but not all, of the African kingdoms. We're going to divide the African kingdoms notes up into two separate videos. So this particular video is going to encompass information about the East African Kingdom of Axum, as well as the South African Kingdom of Zimbabwe, which is not even technically on this map. Then in a later video, we will focus on the three West African civilizations of Ghana, Mali, and the Songhai. Before we get started, I want to talk a little bit of geography. So, when we're talking about Africa, we're going to divide it into these three orange areas. We have Western, Eastern, and Southern Africa. When people talk about Northern Africa, they're talking about this Mediterranean coast. So Egypt, Algeria, those places are going to be Northern Africa, and we're not actually talking about any of those cultures. Today's notes are going to encompass the Eastern and the Southern portions. So that's where we're looking at these sections. Central Africa is this general area in the center here where the Congo River comes through. And then in the next set of notes, we will cover Western Africa, which is essentially, if you just take the big bulgy part out of Africa, that's what's considered Western Africa. That's where the Ebola crisis is currently happening. This video is being made in 2014. So the Kingdom of Axum is located in mostly present-day Ethiopia, though also portions of present-day Sudan. It's sort of going to come into place as a replacement of the Nubian society from our river valley civilizations. We talked about Egypt and we talked about Nubia in our river valleys. So this is where the Nubians were, and the Axum populations come up just south of it along the Blue Nile. The Nile River actually, if I make this map a little bit bigger, splits apart. So its headwaters are way down here, right, because the Nile flows north. The Nile flows up towards the Mediterranean Sea. So at the bottom of the Nile, it splits into the White Nile and the Blue Nile. So it emerges along the Blue Nile. And it's in modern-day Ethiopia, as I said, and they expand throughout all of the Ethiopian highlands, which are exactly what they sound like. They are a plateau, a higher area in elevation from the majority of Africa, especially along the coast of the Red Sea and the Nile Basin. We first see mentions in history of them in 100 CE, and their dynasty lasts in Ethiopia until 1975. This man in the bottom corner, he was the very last Axum dynasty ruler, and he was in power until his death in 1975. It was a very long-reaching civilization. They are very into Indian Ocean trade. When we drew our trade routes, we highlighted that there's a trade route that followed the Indian Ocean and Maritime, goes down the Red Sea, and then across the Gulf of Aden over to India. And they're going to be very big proponents of that sort of trade system. They have a very big blend of Arabic and Kush, Nubian Kush cultures. But their population is very diverse. You've got Egyptians, people from Saudi Arabia, the Greeks and the Romans end up in Axum in some places, the Persians, and also the people from India traveling along the Indian Ocean trade route. So they would come in from the Indian Ocean and they would travel to cities along the Axum coast and then just live in Axum. So it's a very diverse population. They begin as animistic, which is, again, sort of the traditional native concept. You think about Native American cultures and worshiping Mother Nature and Mother Earth and the animals all having spirits. That's this concept. They did, however, have one major god, Marem, that they believed that kings were direct descendants of, similar to the divinity of Japanese emperors, the mandate of heaven concept, where the gods were putting the kings into power in China. They have this same monotheistic ruling sort of culture, though they did have multiple other gods. They were a polytheistic culture. They become exposed to Christianity with trade with the Middle East, obviously before Islam was created. And it becomes, and is still today, one of the largest Christian areas in the entire continent of Africa. This obviously shows you Christianity, and this map shows you Christianity and how Axum was involved in that spread. But this other picture of the little boys is a early 2000s photo of a Christian ceremony in Ethiopia. The other culture that we're going to use in these notes is the Empire of Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is a country in Africa today, unlike Axum, which you can't find on a map today. But it's located between the Zambezi and the Limpopo rivers. So remember, the Zambezi comes across right here, and then the Limpopo is below it, and they settle the land between it. So they're sort of the Mesopotamia, right, of southern Africa. So they settle the land between the rivers. They have access to the Indian Ocean. They have access to a lot of gold. Africa is a very rich land, and so there's a lot of gold that they had access to. They are going to dominate trade, again with India along the Indian Ocean, and they get a lot of their money through taxes on the people who were coming to Zimbabwe to trade. A lot of cultures do this. The Persians do this, but the culture of Great Zimbabwe is, of all of this sort of entire section of southern Africa, they're the best and they're the wealthiest of the cultures in southern Africa. The city of Great Zimbabwe is the city at the absolute heart of the kingdom. We had not known anything about it until it was discovered in 1871, because the people abandoned it. Sort of like when we're going to talk about the Mayan, we're going to talk about how we don't really know what happened to them. We don't know why they stopped using the city of Great Zimbabwe, but it sat empty and unknown for 400 years. The picture down here on the bottom right-hand corner shows you sort of the outline structure and how, it's a stone walled building. This is essentially a road. Would be an alleyway between the buildings. It's a very, very rich area. And I've got with this map, with this picture called the House of Stone, I'm going to make it a little bigger and we'll go through some facts about it. So if I click the next arrow, it'll show you that there's a lot of weathering. The buildings and the stones and the walls are made of granite, and granite is a really strong rock, but it does deteriorate. And when it sits empty for 400 years before we even had people discovering it again, obviously it's going to have some erosion. They put together 900,000 slabs just in the walls alone, and they put them together without the use of mortar. Mortar's like the soft, wet sort of mud that we use to stack between bricks. If you look at cinder blocks and bricks in today's world, we use mortar all the time, and they built the entire thing without any mortar. They had to literally just stack it and rely on friction and weight. We don't think it was a fortress for a wide variety of reasons, most notably that there isn't a lot of weaponry that's discovered there, and if it was a fortress, you would think that there was going to be weaponry. But we also think it potentially is a religious center. And if I change this to the map, it'll show you that first you had the Mutapa, then the Torwa, and then Great Zimbabwe. Those are the three major groups. They have trade routes all along both rivers and out into the Indian Ocean. But look at the access to gold. If I bring back up the entire thing, look at how much gold is around Great Zimbabwe. There are tons and tons of gold mines. And that's really, really helpful when you're trying to build a strong empire. All right, so that's it for the notes on Axum and Zimbabwe. As always, if you have any questions, let me know. You will find a second video that covers the West African kingdoms of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai.